Law enforcement officials telling ABC News that before the chaos broke out,
run, Mija, run,
that they believe the suspect had been looking for a good place to target and shoot Mexicans. Law enforcement officials telling us Crucius entered the Walmart on Saturday morning, first with no weapon, apparently to case it.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz, Public Affairs here in Chicago.
We always focus on issues that are of Illinois and things that are impacting life in Illinois and public policy. Sometimes national issues impact the whole nation, and so it would be wrong for us not to address these shootings that took place both in Dayton and in El Paso, Texas. And Jeff, it's quite a national tragedy, and it obviously reawakens, among other things, the whole issue of gun control, part of which we've covered recently with your interview with Charles Butler. But what are your initial thoughts, Jeff?
Well, it makes that interview very timely because here in Chicago, we've learned to live with 600 to 750 homicides or so a year. Currently, we're closer to 600, not just a few years ago, we were 750. You want to break that down? How many is that? You got 12 months into six. You got like 50 or so homicides a year now, okay, in Chicago. We just live with that, Terry. It's no big deal. It happens. On a bad weekend a year ago, we had 12 fatalities and 74 shootings. We just live with that, Terry. I shouldn't say we do. You don't. I don't. Because we don't live on the west side and the south side. But the people who do, they try to avoid the bad areas. They try to hope that it doesn't happen. They're pretty close. And now we got craziness, okay? What happened in El Paso? We'll go into that. We'll go into what happened in Dayton, okay? And the craziness about the discussion and about it's all the president's fault. It's all the right-wingers' fault. Oh, except when there's a left-wing background, then we ignore it. If I sound a little annoyed, I am, Terry. I am a little annoyed that we're going through the same stupid, silly discussion nationally and locally, and people are not willing to look at the issue and just say point blank, here's the problem, here's what we need to do. How's that? I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore, Terry.
Well, you know, this is the thing. I think we keep sweeping these issues under the rug. And, you know, we kind of did that with terrorism for years. It was like acceptable losses until 9/11 happened, and then we could no longer sweep terrorism under the rug. But terrorism had been happening for decades before 9/11, and it was just...
So let's just cut to the chase, Terry. You tell me, what are the things to focus on to fix Dayton and to fix El Paso and somewhat to fix Chicago?
Well, I'm not going to provide solutions, but I would say among the issues, and we have one is that the issue of, is it gun control or is it mental health? And they're not mutually exclusive. And one of the issues that the people who are, let's say, in the NRA group, in the guns rights group, would say that one of their sayings is when minutes count the police, or when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. One of the things that happened in Dayton, which was very unusual as far as these shootings go, is that the police were right on the ball. Couldn't have been faster in this instance. Let's listen from a reporter from the NBC station in Dayton, Ohio, as she recounted some of the events.
Talking about response times for police and whatnot, and obviously what played a big factor here, they say, in this shooting was that police were right there on the scene and were able to take this shooter down in less than a minute. Normally, that officer tells me response times are about 2 to 4 minutes on average.
You got the bug in there?
2 to 4 minutes on average, and you know, this time they got him in a minute. Now the other issue, and this gets then to the gun control issue. The other issue that comes out of Dayton is even when the police were able to take down this shooter, killed him within 1 minute, you can't ask for a better response than that. The man still killed 9 people in less than a minute. So then that gets us into, not that I'm taking a position, but the issue is, then should we have these guns, not a firepower that can shoot so many bullets in such a short amount of time?
Right. Why do we need to have AK-47s? I'm not saying, again, we don't. Maybe somebody could make a good argument for why civilians exercising their First Amendment rights, as held in Heller, individual rights, notwithstanding what the Second Amendment says about a militia being necessary to the well-being of the public or something like that. Yeah, yeah. Why do we need AK-47s? Do I need to have that to exercise my Second Amendment right? Because we know from what Scalia said, I believe in Heller, I think it was Scalia, Second Amendment is not absolute. We can have reasonable gun control. We can't just like say nobody in Chicago can own a handgun because that was unreasonable. But if we could reasonably limit access to AK-47s, and I know people will still get them, but we will raise the cost. Fewer people will get them, hopefully fewer bad guys, and if good guys like police need that to balance out the firepower, let them have it. They may need it because they may encounter something. So that's one.
Go ahead.
That's one. Two, we obviously, so that's sort of the speed issue. They're there in a minute or whatever it was, 20 seconds. It was over in 26 seconds, something like, but 9 people are dead and 20 something, I think, are injured. So, or maybe it was, I think, 35. I don't remember. Quite a few in a short amount of time. So, do we need to have people with guns that can dispense bullets, like several hundred in a short amount of time? Because that gets at your issue. If we could have slowed this down for that first minute, maybe 5.
Well, my issue is a couple
3.
of things. One, let's just, and I'm framing, I'm not arguing.
No,
One,
right.
one is that we talked about the response time of police. In Dayton, it was unusually quick. I would say gun advocates often do have a point that when seconds count, the police are minutes away. They would say, therefore, the concealed carry laws that now, Illinois was the last one in the nation, but now we're in 50 states, that you have people who would have a gun that could fire back at the bad people. The gun advocates would say, even though in this case it was the police, that it supports their argument that the way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Now, those who are more of the gun control are going to say, let's take away these AR-15s, any of these guns that shoot so many, because the Dayton shooter, even though he was killed in a minute, killed 9 people. And they would say, let's have a so-called assault weapons ban. Let's take a look. We passed an assault weapons ban at the U.S. Congress. It was in effect for about 6 years. Here's a graph. And this graph would tell us that the way I look at it, it's hard to see any kind of a correlation when you look at the 6 years when there was the assault weapons. It really doesn't look, as far as the number of mass shootings during that time period, too much different than the preceding period or the immediate period thereafter. The other sad thing to note is that after 2010, so over about the last decade, we see where the peaks are much higher, and that we've just had a whole lot more shootings, mass shootings here. And these are again, as you see at the top, the number of people being killed in these mass shootings.
Right, and so we don't have enough detail on this graph to see it. We invite people in their comments. We should remind people, good of them to share the show, good of them to give us comments, which they can do. Maybe they can tell us some of that data. And because people who support bringing back the assault weapons ban argue that it was successful after it was passed in '94. And you couldn't see from that graph, so maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We more detailed discussion and debate and thoughtful discussion of that issue. The basic issue, how much firepower should people have in a free society? How much do they need? And what are the benefits and costs to restricting that? So we've talked about that. We've talked about the benefits of getting good guys there with firepower soon, whether it's through concealed carry or whether it's through a more strategic deployment and allocation of police. We haven't touched on, so those are 2 factors. As you said, this is a multi-factor type thing. They're not mutually exclusive. We haven't touched on the mental health issue. We haven't touched on the red flag issue. Those are key. And we can't just have people say things like, oh, we need to spend more on mental health. Like that's going to filter down to the guy who was the shooter in Dayton.
Well,
for
it
sure.
might have.
You can have a
It
lot
might
more.
have, Jeff.
It
I mean,
might,
it
and
just
it might not.
look, here's
But
the thing.
you have to have excuse me, you have to have a strategic plan to get the mental health to the people who are most dangerous. You can't just say,
Well,
let's increase mental health spending by $2 billion and think that's a good strategic
well, look,
approach.
let's review the last 50 years or so in America. We basically got rid of a lot of these psychiatric hospitals that we used to have. When we look back over this long history, we just showed the graph of the shootings over the last 35 years, we can see time and again where these shooters, whether it was the kid in Parkland, whether it was the kid who shot up the grade school at Sandy Hook Elementary, the guy with the orange hair that went into the movie theater in Colorado, time and again. What we see in Dayton, the guy's girlfriend, former girlfriend, said it almost doesn't surprise her that something like this happened. We see time and again that these people are suffering
Right,
from
and she
mental
didn't do a
illness.
freaking thing. Excuse me, she didn't do a freaking thing because she didn't see a red flag, or she didn't think it was her job, or what.
Well,
The
even
sister
when
who
you
was
do,
killed.
here's the thing. I don't want us just to be bantering argumentatively. The thing is, would say is, we might say, if there was a problem, let's say to the audience, if you knew of someone, what's lacking is a place or a methodology to report them and to do it in a way. It's not to say we can't overcome this. I think we can set up a system so that we can have someone evaluated, have someone reported, but at the same time, not have someone just call up and say, I think Joe's crazy, you ought to throw him into a mental hospital.
We're already doing it, Terry. As you know, I think a number of states have red flag
We're already
laws.
doing what? You got to say.
You said set up a system so that people know how to report it, and when the reports are made, what's done with them, and what incentives do they have to report, and if they don't report, will they be penalized? The red flag laws in various states that are in existence are attempting to do that. So we have a laboratory, 50 laboratories in the United States, 50 states. We should be learning from what we've done. The states that haven't done it should be using that experience to do more. If possibly it's good to do on a federal level, we could try that. I think there's a lot more problems with that. But, sweet Jesus, did they pass a red flag law in Illinois? Do we have a red flag in Illinois? I don't think so, Terry. I sure as hell didn't hear a lot of discussion of that. We heard gaming. We heard a lot of that. We heard an expanded abortion law. Heard a lot of that. We heard a capital plan. All I'm saying, folks, look in your own backyard before you start cleaning up somebody else's.
Well, some of this, I think we need to have federal.
Okay?
We need to have a federal approach in this instance. I think at least on the psychiatric. I think, look, that's common ground. The gun advocates and the gun people that want to regulate guns, some want to just have all guns removed. I don't think that's even conceivable. But they can come together, I think, on saying, we need more mental health. And it's not just the shootings that we have here. Look at the shootings that we have where we see it frequently around the nation. Often we don't hear about them, but where some wife kills the ex-husband, or the ex-husband kills the wife, or some guy kills his whole family. You got
or
that
the
too,
mother, or the mother.
And you got suicides on the rise.
Or the mother calls the police, as apparently happened in El Paso, and says, "My son, the future shooter," this is right. I think this is right, Terry. My son, she didn't say the future shooter, is immature and he owns a gun. I wonder if it's legal. They told her it's legal, and that was the end. I want to know, Terry. Really, a little pressure here on the mayor in El Paso, the police chief, and the closest media. Who was that person who got that call, and what did they do, and why are they still working? Because they don't see. Why are they still working in the police department? Because I don't think they did enough with that call.
Well, that call, I think, was put in.
It's time for accountability for the people who are paid a lot to deal with this. What's the police chief making there? Does he have people who report to them?
Well, first of all, you got the wrong city. The shooter was from Dallas area, and his mother lives in Dallas, and so she was calling the local authorities. She was not calling El Paso.
Thank you for the correction. So the mother calls the Dallas person. Now, and even though that
she didn't say, and by the way, this report just came out as we're recording this on August 8th. She didn't say my son's crazy. Now, maybe she meant that. She said she was concerned he was too immature to have these weapons. Which brings up another issue. I forget the age of this shooter. I think he was in his early 20s. Sometimes, as in this case with the El Paso shooter, the parent feels like they don't have control over their kid. Of course, the kid's an adult, and here the kid had a so-called assault weapon.
Right.
We go back to Sandy Hook. The mother, the kid took the guns that the mother had before he shot the kids at Sandy Hook. He first started by killing his mother. So, we got to have some kind of methodology. And I would say, I don't know the answer. I would say it's an answer that we need to look at and get away from this pointing of fingers. From this, we saw on this graphic, there was mass shootings in any number of administrations. I think this conversation,
let's start right
let me
here.
finish. The conversation of saying that the president is to blame for this and that we're going to take all the guns, these are conversations that don't lead anywhere. I think we got a systemic problem we need to address. Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, can we start here? Thank you for correcting my mistake, that the mother was in Dallas. The shooter had been in Dallas. The mother notices a problem. She calls, and we understand that says, my son is immature. I wonder if he's too immature to be owning this gun. Something to that effect, okay? Doesn't have to be those precise words. And I wondered if this gun is legal. And she's told by the person who received the call. Maybe it wasn't in the police department. I don't know where it was. But certainly somebody knows, and we should track that down and find that person and maybe re-engineer backwards and say, in the future, folks, if a call is made like that, perhaps anywhere in the country, what is our system to review that, to act on it, and to see whether we can avoid these things in the future? Now,
maybe, but I still think that's not addressing the issue. That's after
well, of course it is. That's called a red flag, Terry.
Well,
that's what the red flag.
It doesn't provide us with better mental health. It doesn't allow for someone to be evaluated.
Terry, come on.
And
let me point out one other thing. Analysis.
Let me point out.
Wait a second.
The state of Illinois, who keeps wants to adding more regulations on this, and one can argue whether that's good or not. But the fact of the matter is that we are operating with decades-old computers. One of the things is that the government has
Terry, excuse me.
Let me just finish the thought.
Before you go into a computer,
you got to be able to
for like a month of Sundays, Terry.
You got to be able to look
seriously.
at. You got to have your databases. If you report someone crazy, does that person have a gun? Should we be concerned, or is it just someone who is just going through a depressive point? So yes, we want to have the authorities be responsible, but there's a lot of blame here to go around, and the government, who keeps wanting to add regulations, then never has the infrastructure to enforce their own regulations.
Terry, you need to focus a little bit. We've said there are multi-factors here. So take one factor and develop the approach. Doesn't mean the other factors are important. Then take the next factor and develop the approach. I thought that's what we were trying to do in a methodical way on this show. So when I talk about a red flag, let's take it and develop that further. That doesn't mean you can't do anything on number one, getting mental health assistance to the people who are most dangerous. That would be another factor. Universal background checks, plugging some of those holes. That would be another factor. Pick the 4 or 5 most important factors, work on those legislatively, and to the extent they're executive branch issues or judicial issues, work on that. And let's get some solutions. I think we should go on to some other topics because we're not getting a balanced amount of time here. And also because we've kind of covered Dayton, we've kind of covered El Paso, we've sort of touched on Chicago. Maybe we can do a little bit on Chicago. Okay? So a number of things I've mentioned may apply to Chicago and Illinois. But one thing I didn't mention that people are talking about here, so we could focus a little bit on our elected officials who seem perhaps not to be accountable. We had a situation a year ago, which was a big deal because over a weekend we had 12 fatalities and 74 shootings in 4 or 5 districts, I believe, on the west side and the south side. relatively concentrated area. There may have been a few on the north side, okay? Recently, we had an uptick in the last weekend. I think something like 7 fatalities and 54 shootings, because that had gone down a bit over, but the trend had started to go back up, but it wasn't as bad as a year ago, okay? So the short of it is, what are we doing differently? We've had a mayor there for 10 weeks. Does she have a new and different strategic plan? Mayor Lightfoot. She says she does. In a nutshell, it's to flood the zone. She told me when I asked her, this is what she said a few weeks ago. She said it's to flood the zone, take all the different approaches, various agencies, various departments in the city of Chicago that can have an impact and get them focused on reducing the shootings and the homicides. And guess what? I think we can now conclude after 10 weeks, maybe it's working, but maybe you need a little bit more. And here's one thing she raised, the mayor did. And she said in that weekend, she held up a picture on Accountability Tuesday of the firepower. What do you call them? AR-15s, AK-47s, basically military-style weapons that can shoot rapidly in a short amount of time. And she pointed out the bail was set for one person where they discovered these weapons when they were arrested. Okay. The bail was set for $10,000, which means that person has to come up with $1,000 to get out. And she said, that is a dangerous person. We're not going to convict him yet. He or she has a right to a trial, but don't release him, because you can hold people you can set the bail and say no bail.
Let's move on. I would say, look,
Can we just say one more thing? One more thing. The mayor said 2 weeks ago, when she raised that problem then, she and the police chief were going to try to sit down with Tim Evans, the chief of the circuit court, who deals with this issue, the courts do, of setting bail, and the chief of the criminal courts, who deals with this issue. So I asked her just a few days ago, did you sit down? She said, no. You know,
all right,
people should be hammering
One of the
her.
things that she did
Whose
say,
fault is it that she didn't sit down?
before we run out, I want to get to the mayor's
down.
bite. One of the things the mayor just said, we had the bloodiest, not only these shootings in El Paso and Texas, and Dayton, I should say. We also had the bloodiest weekend in Chicago. One thing she was asked about this solution and about more policing. Maybe she's for more policing, but she also noted that there's got to be another solution besides just more policing, and that a lot of more policing on the south and west sides have been tried over the years where they've spent millions of dollars. Here's Mayor Lightfoot.
Millions of dollars policing on the west side. CPD, federal and state law enforcement, and we have barely moved the needle.
Let's not go on to another topic.
So we're, that's the mayor. And so we have this area, we have this whole thing about, it's not just the crazy people and the lone shooters. We also have hang on, let me just finish one thought, Jeff.
What did she just say? Just tell us what she said. Just tell us. What did she say? Make sure they understood it.
What she just said? She just said that we've spent millions of dollars already on extra policing, and we've hardly moved the needle at all.
So what does that suggest to you?
That we need to do more. It suggests to me we need to do more. I think I'm interpreting what I hear from the mayor. I think she's saying we need to do more than just use the slogan, we need to get tough on crime. She's not saying we shouldn't get tough on crime, but there's got to be there's got to be other approaches here. Let me quickly throw in, I want to bring back in your interview of Charles Butler. This applies. It was a very timely interview on your topics, and Charles Butler, a black conservative radio host, also spoke, and this is before the shootings of this past weekend. Here's what Charles said.
These people continue to support Democrats who give them a poor quality of life, and basically their neighborhoods are war zones. I declared that back in '07 on the radio, that these are war zones. By any definition, the south side and the west side is nothing but a war zone.
Nothing but a war zone, and that's what he said.
A war zone, a war zone, a war zone. Why is that important, Terry?
Go ahead.
Are the west side and south side a war zone? That's important because maybe normal, typical policing doesn't work. That's Charles's point. Doesn't mean you don't use it. Doesn't mean you don't spend more. Doesn't mean you keep trying. Maybe you need something in addition to that policing. Maybe you need some way to really get at those most dangerous people who are preying on the people on the south and west side, okay? In these crime-infested areas, in these drug-infested areas. And before people call them a racist for using the word infestation or infested, look it up, folks. It's a perfectly good word. If your crime is prevalent, another way of saying crime prevalent, crime infested. If drugs are prevalent, another way of saying that, drug infested. If you have drug dealers on every street corner and they're getting away with it, and that's not a good thing for your neighborhood in the west and the south side, change it. And if you're a congressman and you have something to say about federal aid being spent there, do something. Don't just call the president a racist. Maybe he is and he isn't. If you want to call him a racist, give a plausible argument. Don't say he used the word infested, okay? I mean, folks, people are dying here. They're dying on the south and west side. I care, and I hope you care, and Terry cares. Let's do something, okay? Let's stop talking about nonsensical things, okay? I mean, we haven't gotten to illegal immigration. We hope to get there. Because, folks, there is a difference between illegal immigration and immigration. And if you think there isn't, we should have a debate. That'll be another show. But for today, we're talking about reducing homicides, reducing shootings in the inner cities where they're quite prevalent. And we're talking about reducing these mass shootings that happened in Dayton and happened in Parkland and happened in El Paso. Let's talk about doing something on that. And while we're on Chicago, and then you can turn. So I've mentioned some of the people, Mayor Lightfoot was supposed to meet with those folks. She hasn't. Tony Preckwinkle, the Cook County Board President, who she beat 3-1, keeps talking about, isn't it terrible that she keeps focusing on bail? Because we've shown that it's not really dangerous. Well, tell you what, Terry, let's invite the president, Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle, to come on and make that argument. I just tired of people making arguments, but they're not available to be challenged by the press. And I'd like to see, I'd like to see Lori Lightfoot have the discussion publicly with Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle.
Here's what I would say.
And see if we can get that bail issue resolved.
Let me jump in.
Get one issue resolved.
All right, time's of the essence.
Yes.
We have too much banter. We have too much irresponsible talk. The people that think that they can collect all the guns and that's going to solve it and say it worked in Australia. Australia doesn't have the Second Amendment, number one. You're going to spend the entire rest of your life trying to fight that and never get anywhere. We need to hone down on what can we do, not trying to win stupid political arguments. People are dying. We need to have some kind of solutions that make sense. And we ought to get some people across not just the political spectrum, but bring in mental health experts, bring in law enforcement experts. There's got to be some answers out there.
Well,
and I would say to the viewers, let's move beyond what we're just talking over each other.
Yeah, maybe the legislators can get off their ass. Maybe we can get the legislators to get off their ass and not wait till November in the state of Illinois, okay? Give them a few bucks if that's what they need. If $70,000 is enough, it's not enough. If paying your deputy governors $270,000 a year is not enough, you should pay them more. But let's get somebody to get some things. I'm not going to repeat it. We focused already on 4 or 5 issues. Let's get them to discuss it. Let's get some legislation, and let's do something. Do it on the city level, on the county level, on the state level. Damn it, let's do something.
Jeff, we're gonna say goodbye. Folks, leave your comments for us and tell us what you think. This is obviously a national discussion. We appreciate you watching. Jeff, we'll catch you next time.